Hello, good people. Welcome to the Heaven and Earth Church podcast. My name is Brad Miller, and I'm the producer and one of the hosts of the podcast. And today we have as our special guest, her name is Angela Stackhouse, and we welcome you to the HeavenEarth Church podcast.
Thank you.
Angela, tell us a little bit about you. First of all, where do you come from? What's hometown for you?
Hometown's Shelby County. I grew up in Fairland, Indiana, which is a little bit northwest of Shelby County, or Shelbyville, and went to Fairland, a small rural school where Ross, my husband, also went. And my family still lives there mostly. And now we're, of course, in Greenwood, Western Greenwood. So still pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you meet Ross in high school then?
I did. I actually met him in middle school.
Middle school.
Yeah.
Kind of grew up together. Wow.
He's a grade behind me. So we weren't interacting all the time. But when we got into high school, he was in advanced math and I was just in regular math. So we ended up lining up there. So we spent a little more time together then. So. Well,
awesome. And then, so did you ended up getting married, I don't know, shortly after high school? I don't really know. Help me out.
Yeah, no, we actually, let's see. So we started dating in high school and I was a senior and he was a junior. And then I went off to IU for 1 year. And we kind of, which a lot of couples do, kind of had a lot of breakups throughout college. And then the year, let's see, it would be 2010. So 2 years after I graduated from college, we got married. So we had a pretty long time together. And then sometimes not together, but mostly together.
And we should, I get that, of course. But I get what we want to say at this point and be a part of our conversation is that Ross Stackhouse is the pastor of HeavenEarth Church. And so you were just a part of the ongoing mission and ministry here. But let's learn a little bit more about you particularly, about kind of some of the formative things that happened in your life, either growing up or in your family of that you grew up with, or school or whatever. What were some of the things that were kind of help shape the person that you are?
That's a good question. One that I don't probably reflect on terribly much, but I grew up in, I guess what you would consider, at least my immediate family was a nuclear family. Both my parents are still married today. I had a younger sister that was from that marriage, but then I also had two older siblings, an older brother and an older sister from my mom's first marriage. So we had kind of that nice dynamic where they would kind of be living with us sometimes and then living with their dad sometimes. Grew up in the country. Actually, I started out in Carmel and I went to school there till first grade. And then we moved to Fairland. So that was quite the transition moving out to the country, and one that really I loved living in the country. And I would say probably one of the biggest influences, my parents were both small business owners. So my mom had a diner and my dad had a hardware store.
Okay.
And that was it led to kind of a charmed childhood where I got to, go to these businesses and work and then eventually actually really work.
Kind of little flavor of small business, entrepreneurship, and that type of thing.
And got to spend a lot of time with my parents, which was nice.
Yeah.
And my other family, my dad's father my grandpa helped him. They owned the store together. So I got to spend a lot of time with my grandparents. Another thing that was definitely formative is that both my older siblings have struggled with addiction their entire lives. So my older heroin addiction specifically. So I got to see as a child growing up kind of how that was impacting their lives for the negative. And it definitely kind of put me on the straight and narrow. I didn't want to do anything that they were doing at the time. And then also my sister has had four children that my parents have raised. So starting when I was 12 years old, my sister became pregnant when I was 12 years old, and then Eli was born when I was 13. So I really have basically four younger siblings, even younger than my sister Maria. Yeah, and that was definitely, that's been a huge impact on my life.
Really a part of forming the person that.
Yes, definitely. Yep, and their addiction has too. It's an awareness I have.
To deal with that challenge, that adversity in your family you grew up in. And so let's talk a little bit about your life of faith. You're in a part of a faith institution here, HeavenEarth Church now, but people come to be a part of a church for lots of reasons. And obviously your husband's the pastor here. That's one reason I know. get into some of that, but
Yeah.
let's talk about your faith story, about how you came to faith in the first place and how that's kind of been a part of forming your life, part of your faith story.
So after we moved from Carmel back to Shelby County, my mom's from Shelbyville originally. So I think she felt a little more called to get us what she considers back into the church. We started going to the church when I was probably 11, 12, 13-ish that she went to as a child, which was First Baptist in Shelbyville, which is part of the American Baptist Church. There are a lot of different Baptists, and some of them have quite a bit of differences. So I know growing up, I didn't realize that there were all of these different flavors of Baptist, but American Baptists have, for instance, they'll have like women preachers, which is different than some Baptist religions. I think it's a little bit more like I was allowed to do certain things that I know some of my other Baptist friends weren't. Like I could read Harry Potter, for instance, just to give people kind of, you know, an idea of what it was like. But as far as kind of the flavor of what you would hear on a Sunday, there was definitely more fire and brimstone than what I would hear Ross talking about now. And there were some things that I think happened in the church that harmed other people. I don't feel harmed by them, but I was part of the era that grew up in purity culture, which was a big deal. I went to church camp a lot, and that was like one of the themes one year for the entire church camp was like true love waits. And so I kind of grew up in that era of, I don't know what it's like anymore because I don't go to a Baptist church, but at least at that time that was a big deal. But I'm a really big rule follower. So I actually liked having
So you like that?
I liked having the
the
structure.
purity culture type of thing. It gave you a real kind of rigid set of parameters to live within, right?
Yep. And the church kind of as a whole did too. I felt like, you know, some of the stuff that I realize now is probably dogma. You know, it might not have come straight from Jesus's lips or even some of the stuff that we see in Acts. I think for me, and I know many people have a very different experience, it helped me because I was prone to wanting to follow the rules. So it helped me kind of create a framework for my life.
Yeah.
So
how did that upbringing there kind of evolve or influence you as you and Ross started your life together? And where are you at now? How has your faith journey evolved kind of to where you're at right now?
It's evolved a lot. The older I get, and I think a lot of people probably have the same experience, I realize that the world is not black and white, that there is so much nuance to the world, and that a black and white framework, while it might have worked for my younger life, and it really even works a lot for my life now. I mean, I'm still a rule follower. I work in compliance. That's what I do. I realize that it doesn't always work when you're applying it to the greater world. And so I've definitely had some faith crises along the way where it didn't seem like things really, you couldn't reconcile them with a black and white framework. And so that was difficult at times. And I also there was a lot of evolution where, for me, I realized growing up, a lot of the discussion was about how to get into heaven. And that was really foundational to my faith. How the choices you need to make to get into heaven. Well, I definitely had a faith crisis when I realized that it meant if certain people are getting into heaven, that means certain people are going to hell. And I looked around me, and there were so many people in my life that weren't following that strict, like A plus B equals C guideline for how to get into heaven. But they were really, really good people and like pillars of my life.
So you had some real dilemmas that you were dealing with,
Yes.
kind of based on your faith teaching compared to your life experience, right?
Yeah. And that was troubling to me. And I think it probably led to that becoming it wasn't just that realization that if there were certain people in my life that were going to hell, then I wasn't going to be able to continue in that mindset. And I know for a lot of people, that still is kind of their.
Did you come to any kind of resolution or a place of understanding where that you're at now? So take us there.
I think so too. Or I think I have. So and Ross was very aligned with me too, by the way. We had a very similar, we both grew up in a rural area that kind of had a similar kind of feel, even though he went to a Methodist church and I went to a Baptist church. eventually, when you look at the Bible, I think in its totality, you realize that it's actually that the question is not actually how to get to heaven. That's really not what's the prevailing question, that it's actually a lot more about relationship with God. And so that has helped me a lot. I'm not focusing so much on where everybody is going. I'm focusing more on how do we live out our relationship with God in relationship with others. And that's been really helpful to me in my faith.
So it's gone from kind of a little bit of dogmatic to more relational, how relate to Jesus and to
Yes.
others and how they're all integrated together, that kind of
Yes.
thing.
Yep.
Well, that kind of takes us to how now your life of faith is being lived out. You are a part of the HeavenEarth Church, and we're here on the
Yeah.
HeavenEarth Church podcast. So tell us about how you ended up getting connected to HeavenEarth Church in the first place, and kind of what are you involved with now?
Yeah. Well, it started out with kind of a funny story, actually. I told Ross before he became a pastor that I was adamantly not going to be a pastor's wife,
Right.
which of course is a ridiculous thing to say, probably. But again, I grew up in a Baptist church where I felt like there was a prototype or a stereotype for what a pastor's wife did. And I didn't feel like I fit that stereotype.
Just take a slide aside. Give me a couple nuggets of what was burnt in your brain about that.
Like they led children's church all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of them didn't work, which is totally fine. It's just
Yeah.
that I knew I wanted to work in my life. They played the piano. I don't know how to play the piano.
Right.
They always sang on Sunday.
I got you.
Yeah, so those are some of the things.
Stereotypical. I just
Yeah.
wondered if your experience was similar to that, my understanding and
Yes.
others as well. But let's go back to how you got connected with HeavenEarth Church, and where we left it at was you told Ross, I don't want to be a preacher's
Yes.
wife in the kind of traditional sense. So what has that evolved to now, and kind of how'd you get started here?
Yeah, and the reason I told him that is because he was in theology. He was in a theology program, and he wanted to be a professor. Well, he got rejected from all of his doctoral programs. And so his sister sent him a job interview, or not a job description for an opening at a church in Carmel. And I was like, I don't want to be a pastor's wife. Well, then he went ahead and applied, despite me. And he was really good at preaching. He'd never preached before. He'd never done anything like that before. And they did like a practice sermon with him. And I went to it and I was like, okay, I think I might have to be a pastor's wife. So he became a pastor in the Methodist Church, which is kind of leading to HeavenEarth Church. And he was at that Carmel church as, I forget all the different terms, a local appointed pastor, I think, not ordained in the church, in other words. And he was there for like 6 years. And thankfully, the stereotypes that I had in my mind about being a pastor's wife were not really stereotypes that I saw in action there. So it ended up being fine, like a lot of things I worry about. And then it came time within the Methodist Church, they move people around. Pastors get moved around to different churches. It's called itineracy. And it came time for him to move to somewhere else. And to make a long story short, he ended up leading the charge of a church plant. And Brad, you probably know more about it than I do, and that, like the different technical terms, but a church plant in Johnson County.
Yeah.
So that's how HeavenEarth Church originated. And it was a house church at first. We were meeting in our house every week. And it's always had a recovery church component. So there was also a recovery church meeting going on. But yeah, it's really grown from there. I can't remember exactly the details about how we ended up in this building, but even that was really felt very ordained.
And that was on the 2018-19 timeframe.
That sounds right. Although it's crazy that, yes, because I started my new job that I'm in right now in 2018.
So what was your initial feelings in that first year or so about the church? Were you kind of thinking, okay, this is a little wobbly, or this is something cool going on here? What were some of your emotions? Because it's not only about starting a church, there's, family life, there's marital life, there's transitioning to a new community, things of that nature. And really, with a new church plant, you do not have a community that's supporting of you initially.
Yeah, totally. I will tell you that, and I hope I don't offend present company and other Methodist pastors, but I really struggled with the idea that our family would be uprooted every so many years because of Ross's calling. And I struggled because I struggled as a woman because I had a job that I liked and I didn't want to be uprooted and moved around away from my job. And I didn't want my kids to be uprooted. So honestly, knowing that we were going somewhere close in proximity to where we were before, which was in Shelby County,
Right.
I was actually very grateful that we were going to be trying to do this. I remember making a joke that I was going to lay in front of cars to like get them to come to our church because I wanted it to work. Because I want to be close to my family. I don't want to move, to Fort Wayne or something.
Any new adventure is a little bit dicey at first, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I felt good about it, knowing that we would still have at least our family within an hour of us, and still be able to see them and participate in family stuff. And with a church plant, if it goes well, then it usually lasts a little longer and you're not uprooted every, 5 years.
Right.
So I was also excited about that prospect, although it is scary because it's a parachute drop.
Yeah.
And oftentimes those don't work. So
tell me about a time in that era of forming the church and getting involved with the community and things that you have chosen to be involved with in the life of the church where you kind of had an aha moment or kind of like, okay, this might work and this is kind of cool. You have a moment like that,
that's a good question.
Of a pivotal moment like that?
I remember during COVID, I can't remember if it was the beginning of COVID or if it was toward the end of COVID, where we decided we would meet outside. I guess it must have been further along because I don't think people were meeting at all. But we decided to have an outdoor meeting and like outdoor church service. And I just looked around and I couldn't believe I looked at all these different people that we didn't know, like 2 or 3 years earlier. And it was very inspiring to see all of these people that somehow had made their way to us, to our church, that we had not even known. Like there was no relationship and now there's a relationship. And it was very organic too. And so that felt really neat. And we've had a couple services like that, like when you see the Christmas service, which a lot of people tend to, your whole church ends up kind of coming to that. And you see everybody in one place, which sometimes you don't do. You don't get to see. And those moments have been really, it's not all about the numbers, but there is certainly something about seeing everybody together.
Certainly something to be said for kind of the validity that comes with seeing a group of people there. And that's true. So, so that was kind of your moment there where you had kind of, okay, this just might work. There's something going on here. And tell me about every endeavor has its times of challenge and of stress and crisis. So if you don't mind, tell us about a kind of a lump in the throat moment that you've had in the life of the church, in the life of the church or interpersonally or whatever, that you kind of like, okay, this is trouble. And what am I going to do about it? What am I going to pursue this?
Yep. I know exactly what it is for me. So there was a time, and it was shortly after Iva was born, which I think it put us again in the middle of COVID. So I was already feeling probably isolated. And we had started meeting in the church service in the church, as opposed to like meeting outside during COVID and stuff. So it must have been pretty far on. We didn't have a lot of kids coming at that time. I was really the only one with kids. So I found myself coming to church with my children. Ross would have already left in the morning. I found myself getting the kids ready to go to church, to take my children to the back, to watch my own children, to not even be around anybody, and then to come back home. And I found that to be very, it was difficult for me. I'm not a person who likes to be told what to do anyway. And sometimes a pastor's wife can feel so pressured to do something, even though nobody's telling her to do it. That
goes a little bit to the stereotype you had, the children's ministry and things like that. Yeah.
And the line gets blurred where you're saying, is this my decision or am I compelled to do this, even though nobody's said it? And that was difficult for me. And I was going to a counselor at that time and I talked to her about it. And it eventually got to the point where I told Ross, I'm not coming anymore. I'm going to stay at home. I'm going to watch the service at home while the kids play in the comfort of our own house where I can actually hear what's happening. And until we get like a better structure in place, that's what it's going to be. And I felt I've told you before, I'm a rule follower.
Yeah.
So that was very
So
difficult.
that really went against the grain of you personally.
It did.
And I'm sure it had its challenges family-wise, marital-wise, all
It
that
did.
stuff.
It was hurtful to Ross, which I don't blame him, but it was one of those moments that I had to be like authentic to myself.
You had to search yourself to
Yeah.
be, because I sensed that this was a moment when you kind of felt something kind of slipping away, some sense of this was just not working here.
I felt my autonomy slipping away.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have control over that decision. And it was a decision that it felt like it was harmful to me at the time. Not that Ross was actively doing that. I want to be very clear. Ross wasn't harming me. It was just the position. It was the circumstances.
Circumstances were happening that were as they were.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I like to talk about moments, Angela. And so we've talked a bit about kind of a pivotal moment when you kind of thought, okay, this just might work. We had some crowds here out there, and we talk about those moments when you kind of had the lump in the throat and, just hard decision that you had to make to stay home and to put primacy on your family, really.
Yep.
And that's a hard decision, sometimes more harder than people than me realize for clergy, couples and families to navigate. But let's talk about a moment in the church or otherwise that I'll just kind of put it this way, that was just kind of a cool, high, holy moment when you just kind of knew that, okay, this isn't just kind of a deal where this organizationally is going to work, but this is a God thing. This is a holy thing. This is something bigger than myself and bigger than a lot of things. Have you had a moment like that?
I think it was one of the, I think it was our very first harvest gathering that we had, which is something that we have come to do now every year. And it's another time in the church. I've mentioned that I don't know that I mentioned that we still have house churches going, but we also have our recovery church. I have mentioned that. And then we have our normal Sunday gathering. There are a lot of different people that oftentimes don't come together at once. And we had a harvest gathering where everybody did come together at once. And it wasn't for the church service. It was to just be in community together and to see each other. It was either the harvest gathering or the spring gathering. Either way, it was a moment where we were all eating together. I felt like we were doing, even though it's, a modern flair with cell phones around and stuff, it felt like we were doing something holy and connecting to something that people have done forever, like commune together, eat together, and just celebrate together.
Kind of,
and it was very nice.
A connection kind of with something that's a little bit traditional, a little bit historical, but in the context of a new church plant.
Yeah.
So
and that was special.
And that was a God thing, right?
Yeah, it totally was. Yeah.
I'm going to turn this around. Having those moments that you've shared here now, let's bring it around to why do you think, if you were not married to the pastor, do you think this is the type of church that if you lived in this community, you moved here for whatever reason, professional life or whatever, is this the type of church you might want to either be attracted to or seek out? Or what is it about this place that you might be attractive to you in that regard?
I definitely think it would, although it is hard to, Ross and I have grown. We got together as children and we've been so influential on each other in the paths that we've taken. It's hard to imagine what type of person I would be without him. But I can only answer, with a present mind. Yes, it's definitely a church I would want to come to. I love how we have a very diverse group of people, maybe not racial diversity, but socioeconomic diversity. We have the diversity that you see with people who are in addiction or recovering from addiction versus people who aren't. That's a big difference. We have a lot of political diversity, and I really value that in my life and in my children's lives. I don't want them to be part of, even though the experience that I had in my First Baptist Church was a positive experience, it was very, I think, sometimes one-dimensional in a way. Like I wasn't exposed to a lot of people, and that wasn't First Baptist's fault. It was, just a little town church, and that's just the people that come there. But I'm thankful that we've created a space where we do attract a lot of different kinds of people. And I think because there are so many different people on so many different journeys, my hope is that people would feel welcomed no matter where they are.
Given your interaction you have with people in the church, because the point of entry for many people is through the pastor, Ross, and then you're right there as well, being a part of that deal. what do you think would keep you here, but kind of integrate that with what you hear people talk about, well, why they stay a part of HeavenEarth Church?
Yeah. I mean, I hesitate to say this because it's one of the things Ross and I always talk about should not be the premier thing. But Ross is a very gifted teacher. I think he's been given a lot of gifts, and I know for sure that's one of the reasons people stay is because when they hear him preach, I think it feels very meaningful to them and to their lives. But there's a lot outside of teaching and preaching in a church, and a church should be a much more vibrant offering than that. And I think that the fact that we're small is a big draw to me. I'm not a big person who likes the great big churches where you feel like you're kind of just going to check a box sometimes. And I mean, any church can really be that, like you're going to check a box. But I feel like we're hopefully building the opposite of that. Like you really can feel connection, and you can feel, I don't know what convicted without being judged.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a difficult balance sometimes.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Connected and convicted, but without being judged. I think that's an interesting way of putting it. And so I think that's kind of the struggle a lot of people have. They do not want to feel guilt-driven, but they want to feel responsible. They want to feel kind of connected to something greater themselves that they can invest in. That is something that would make a difference, because I believe many people really want to make a difference, and they're transformed by that. So I'd like you to tell me a story, if you will, Angela, about a person or situation here in the life of the church where you really seen something happen that changed, either a person's life change or a situation change, where life change took place.
Trying to think what that would be. I don't know if I can think of one off the top of my head. I mean, we've certainly changed. I don't know if I can think of one.
Okay. We might come back to that, but the idea is here about some person maybe you've seen changed. I know in the recovery ministry, it seems like that's a real thing there. Have you seen any lives change there with that kind of thing going on?
I mean, there have been people that came initially. I mean, they were some of our very first church attendees that are still here, and then there are some that are no longer necessarily attending our recovery church, but Ross is still connected with them through other organizations. And their lives and their testaments are very compelling, especially to other people who are trying to obtain sobriety. And
you've seen that, you've witnessed that.
Yeah. Definitely.
And that's, I think, as a part of what keeps people coming to be a part of something where they see something making an impact, where lives are really changed. And there's included, you mentioned how your life has changed and how the mission ministry of church has done that. And one of the things that I am interested in is the mission statement of the church that is displayed quite prominently is we exist to make a lasting impact in our community.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. What does that statement mean to you personally?
Well, it makes, I mean, we were talking this morning during church, and Ross was recounting a story that really made me think about how I think when you're connected to the vine, and I think that's kind of church speak, but when you're connected to Jesus, that you can't help but flourish. And this is not prosperity gospel. You can't help but feel like your cup can overflow. And that cup, I had this image in my head today of one person's cup overflowing to flow into other people's cups. And I think our church tries to embody that. We make connections throughout the neighborhood, throughout the community, with a lot of different organizations that are already doing really important work. And we've also, Ross and team have also created the HeavenEarth Spaces organization that is trying to make not only housing, but places for nonprofits, physical places for nonprofits to use, and at a discounted rate, basically. And so downstairs in the basement, we have Resources of Hope. That's one example where they offer clothes. They're basically a store for foster parents and foster families, where people can come in and just get resourced for their foster journey. And then the house that the church owns is also now part of HeavenEarth Spaces. The church does not own it. HeavenEarth Spaces owns it. And it used to be part of the church. HeavenEarth Spaces owns it. And it has a family that lives there now that gets reduced rent. So, and we're trying to expand that. HeavenEarth Spaces is trying to expand that. So that's like a very real example of that.
So you see that impact. I guess what I'm getting at is that statement is a real thing. It's not just a trite thing to put on the wall somewhere, right?
Yeah. No, I think it's it's certainly something that is, you can see it in the lifeblood of the church.
One of the things that's said about HeavenEarth Church and is often used to kind of be a descriptor of the church in one line is if you feel you don't fit in church, you fit here. Is that true?
We're really for true? People who don't fit neatly into church.
Is that true? And how do you seen that lived out?
I think it is true. I know for certain that there are many people who have felt harmed by some of the institutional churches that they encountered as children that have found a safe place to exist here and try to grow their relationship with God. And I have always felt like I fit in a church, so I'm not a person that can personally attest to it. But Ross has also felt like he doesn't fit neatly into church, and I would agree with that. And so I think he's tried to build that, and the people around him have tried to build that here. And I think it has worked. I don't think that we get very caught up. We don't get very caught up on, we are a United Methodist Church, but you're not going to hear us talking about it that often. You're not going to hear us talking about a lot of institutional stuff or professionalized church stuff, or even using a lot of churchy words, because we don't want to alienate people who might not, have that insider speak.
Right.
So I think that there are a lot of small intentional decisions made.
There's misfits here, and they're doing okay.
There are, yeah.
Doing okay.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, just one or two more things here, Angela, because I just thank you for your time here today and being part of this. But you're a mom, and you're a professional woman. We haven't talked about your career and things like that too much, but you're a person who's involved with the community in different kinds of ways. Well, let me just ask you, if there's somebody who came to in your life outside of the church, meaning a coworker, or maybe, I know your kids are involved with, athletics and other things, and that kind of stuff. If you're talking one of the other moms.
Yeah.
And if there's somebody came to you and said, okay, I just got some issue in my life. It might be whatever, job related or marital or, health or whatever. They got some issues in their life. Do you think you'd be comfortable inviting them to be a part of HeavenEarth Church as a part of responding to their need?
Yeah, I definitely would. I think we have something. I think what we have here is something very special and different than what a lot of people perceive church to be. And it has a very vulnerable community that comes along with it. And I think that's one of the most powerful tools in the face of really any kind of adversity is vulnerability. And I think that people would benefit from that. This kind of harkens back to your last question, the one before this, but we joke a lot because one of our biggest evangelists for this church is actually an atheist. It's a woman in Franklin who has sent like 5 people to us.
Yeah.
And it's just really funny to me that she's constantly sending people to our church because of what she has seen, even though she's atheist.
Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's kind of wrap it up with this. Your mom, we've kind of touched on that a little bit here, but just tell us a little bit about home life for you in the sense of, tell us about one cool thing, tell us the names of your kids, and then something cool about each of them.
Okay. So I have Boaz, who's 8, Iva, who's 5, and Juniper, who is almost a year and a half. Boaz is the typical oldest child. He's a rule follower like his mommy. And he has a heart of gold. His teacher said that he is a friend to everyone. That was one of her main pieces of feedback she gave us in our parent-teacher conference. Iva is like a ray of sunshine. She is on the go all the time and wanting to do some sort of activity all the time. Making things out of materials you wouldn't even think could really amount to anything. That's her superpower. And then Juniper, who's the caboose, we're not having any more, if I have anything to say about it. And I never say never anymore because Ross became a pastor, like you said, okay. So I don't want to tempt fate here. But most likely she will be the last child of ours. And she has really just been, she's just been it's been such a joy. She is so funny and just so cute. And it just tickles us every day getting to watch her. I mean, all four of us, because the kids are older. She was born when I was 4.5. So we just she's like the little princess that we just do whatever she wants, basically.
She's awesome.
So,
And I still don't know how to get that top knot thing working on her hair there.
No.
Well, just one or two other things. And that's just, you mentioned that you and Ross basically grew up together, more or less.
Yep.
And here you are. You're raising a family. You're planting the church. You're doing all the things here.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about Ross. Tell us whatever you want to tell us about Ross. Good, bad, ugly, anything.
Oh,
but just a thought there.
So I remember when I was in high school, before I had really had serious relationships, because I wasn't really that kind of person that had a lot of serious relationships or any kind of relationship, just to make that clear, serious or not serious. And I was very independent. That's a better way of putting it. I didn't really need anybody else. I remember telling myself that I wanted to find somebody that was genuinely a kind person. Like that was kind of like the number one attribute that I wanted in a partner. And Ross is one of the most genuinely kind, empathetic people that I have ever been around. I mean, he has people, we all have people in our lives who have like done something to us and that you feel victimized by. I feel more victimized on his behalf than he ever does on his own behalf. He just gives people so much grace. And it's it's truly really wonderful to watch.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, just one last thing, and that is is there any word of encouragement or anything else you'd like to share with the HeavenEarth Church community?
Just that, if it's the HeavenEarth Church community, we're happy to have you here. That's definitely something. And if it's anybody else who's not part of the church, I hope what I've talked about today makes you feel welcomed and makes you feel like a child of God, because that's important.
That's awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you. Our guest today on the HeavenEarth Church podcast, Angela Stackhouse. And we thank you for joining us here on this podcast, which is all about a church that's looking to make a lasting impact in our community.
Thanks, Brad.